is Stanley Curtis, and I'm the current Vice President of the Historic Brass Society. We're very happy to talk to you today about our great organization, its history, and future plans. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to our current president and the only president we've ever had, Jeffrey Nussbaum.
Hi, so I'm very pleased to be here virtually with you at your conference. And I'd like to just say a few words about the history of the Historic Brass Society. The HBS was created during the 4th annual Early Brass Festival that was held for many years at Amherst, Massachusetts. At the end of that festival, I remember that Ben Peck stood up at a little gathering and said, well, you know, we've been talking about it for a while, about formally organizing and creating an organization. Is it time? And everyone yelled, yay, yay, yes, absolutely. And he said, well, who's going to do it? And for reasons that I never understood, Flora Harriman, who was sitting next to me at the time, jumped up and said, Jeff will do it. So I did. And over 3 decades later, I'm still here. But fortunately for everybody, we are in a process of change, much needed change. And I will still be here, but not as president. So when we did first organize in 1988, I had a vision of what the organization should be and could be. And that included having a real serious exchange of ideas and have a forum for those ideas and exchange of ideas on a number of levels, including conferences and symposia, and most importantly, a journal. And I thought that it would be very important to have a serious journal with real serious ideas about brass music and brass history. And as such, I reached out to a number of scholars, and I feel we were very lucky in that very first issue, the 1989 issue. We had a really successful journal with contributors such as Don Smithers and Keith Polk, John McCann. We also had a translation of the Dalakaza method, and that also was a big part of the early stages of the journal, having translations of important methods and treatises.
Just a little bit about the Historic Brass Society Journal, and since this presentation is for the International Trumpet Guild, I'm focusing on a few trumpet articles that we've published over the years. Jeff just mentioned that Don Smithers made a contribution to our very first issue in 1989, and this was actually before I became editor. So here's a picture from Don Smithers' editor, a new look at the evolution of lip-blown instruments from classical antiquity to the end of the Middle Ages. And of course, we know Don Smithers is a real giant. This is a recent article from 2017. Scott Clemens and Bob Barkley reported on a discovery of a previously unrecorded trumpet by Johann Karl Kodesh. Very important instrument find was found in a church in Poland. This is what you see in the picture is a copy of this instrument made by Bob Barkley. Moving along to the 19th century, and this is a very recent article because it's in the 2020 journal, and the 2020 journal should actually be in readers' hands soon. It's at the printers now, and I'm sure it will be mailed out very soon. But Bob Pyle, who is quite a fine acoustician and also a brass player himself, wrote this article, The Acoustics of the Echo Cornet, and you can see the little bulbous thing down there that makes this an echo cornet. Here is an article on non-Western trumpets. Joe Kaminsky wrote this article, Asante Ivory Trumpets in Time, Place, and Context. And you can see this side-blown trumpet called an abin, played by a member of the Ntahera Royal Trumpet Ensemble of Ghana. So that's just a quick overview of some of the variety of articles that Historic Brass Society Journal has published on trumpets.
Yes, I'm calling from Switzerland, from Bern, from our Museum of Wind Instruments. It's hundreds of woodwind and brass instruments, hundreds of trumpets, flugelhorns, cornets here. You may know some of them because I presented in the ITG Journal historical instrument window through Sabine Klaus. You have always very interesting instruments and some of ours too. So maybe you come once to Bern and see this collection. My role I see as a scholar in the HBS board. I see the 19th century. I'm specialized on such instruments like the keyed trumpet, keyed bugle, all these valved instruments stopped. So that's my role as a scholar in HBS board, maybe to emphasize this 19th century music and instruments. Thank you very much.
My name's Annika Scott and I'm calling in today from London. I must admit feeling a bit of an interloper here as a horn player sneaking into the ITG event. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here. It's a real pleasure. I'm primarily a performer. I'm principal horn of a number of international historically informed performance ensembles such as Sir John Eliot Gardner's Orchestre Révolutionnaire Romantique and English Baroque soloists based here in the UK, and groups all the way around the world. So in normal times, I may well be turning up in your backyard on tour anytime soon. I'm also artistic director of the Prince Regent's Band, which is a group that specialises in the great wealth of brass chamber music we are privileged to have from the long 19th century. As I say, normally my work keeps me traveling globally, but like a lot of musicians right now, a lot of performing musicians, I'm currently grounded due to the pandemic. So I'm kind of keeping myself busy and occupied doing what I think a lot of people are doing at the moment and creating online resources, YouTube videos and other social media material for enthusiasts of historic horns. With that sense of outreach in mind and harnessing the power of social media and internet, I'm thrilled to be one of the new board members for HBS. I've been knocking around this organisation for a number of years. The HBS has always been a source of inspiration. As a student, I was an enthusiastic follower of the newsletter. As a professional, I have found the journal exceedingly informative and one of my first ports of call for any research I'm doing. But I would say the most important aspect of HBS has always been for me the sense of community, a community of performers, of scholars, of researchers, of collectors. And it's always been a joy to be able to tap into this wonderful, resourceful community. Therefore, I'm really excited to be getting more involved now, and I'm looking forward to seeing as many historic brass enthusiasts of all stripes joining in as well. And I just want to raise attention to, I think there is a particular appetite right now, given the situation that we all find ourselves in, for a sense of community, of sharing expertise, of sharing knowledge, of us all bringing the communities, the trumpet players, the horn players, all these historic instruments, of us sharing resources and knowledge. So I really hope that members of the ITG will see the Historic Brass Society as a similar community that you might like to get involved in.
Hi, my name is Stanley Curtis. As I mentioned before, I'm the Vice President of the Historic Brass Society. After playing in the U.S. Navy Band for 20 years, I now teach trumpet at Colorado State University. In addition to playing modern trumpet, I enjoy performing on dusty old instruments like the Baroque trumpet, cornetto, and 19th century cornets. I am so grateful that the ITG has given us this opportunity to introduce you to our great organization. I was elected last October as Vice President and President-elect, so I still feel pretty new to this position. While I have been learning how the HBS works from the current executive members and the board, I have also been talking with people that are interested in early brass music all over the world. These conversations have helped me to develop some aspirational goals for the HBS that I would like to implement in the near future. The HBS needs to grow, and it needs to help its members succeed in their own goals. In terms of growth, I especially would like to reach out to amateurs, young people, college teachers, professional performers, people outside of the United States, women, and minorities. I would also like to encourage the development of local chapters with their own leadership. This would help connect people in a local way, and it would help in countries where English isn't the native language. Of course, the HBS has been known for its wonderful journal, one of the most highly respected academic journals related to brass instruments. This has significant value for all of us, but the HBS can do other things that benefit us. For instance, I would like to host performance competitions on historic instruments, which would help young performers have a way to distinguish themselves in their new career. We are also hoping to start a new, less formal publication, which would be ideal for interviews, reviews, spotlights on instrument collections, and lighter scholarly papers. This can also give more experience to those who would like to get established in writing, publishing, and research. I have enjoyed my connection with the Historic Brass Society for more than 3 decades, and I hope to pass that enthusiasm on to you.
And we shall be changed, and we shall be changed.
historical informed practice was started very early. It started about in the 30s, and there was an ensemble, that's the Scheck-Wenzinger ensemble. They started about in the 30s or 40s with recorders, viola da gamba, and this instrument. And as far as I know, I think Ed told me that the first historical trumpets, or so-called historical trumpets, have been made in the 30s by Alexander in Mainz, Alexander the famous horn maker. And I think Ed had some of their instruments, and these are the very, very first Baroque or natural trumpets made. And then for trumpets, it started in about the early 50s. There was an ensemble in Cologne. I think this was the first. That was Capella Coloniensis from the Cologne radio. And in Austria, the Concertos, they also started in the 50s. And my teacher, Walter Holy, was, I think, the first playing the Baroque trumpet. And they had the problem. They had maybe Baroque trumpets or natural trumpets with, of course, without holes and without any technical help. And they have seen the picture by Gottfried Reicher, and the idea was he has his hands so on this instrument, there must be something under his fingers, so maybe holes or so, that they could play the instrument in tune, because of Walter Holy and his colleagues haven't been able to play halfway in tune. And so the first instrument they made, and this is the instrument for the early recordings of the 50s, 60s, from Capella Coloniensis and from Concertos, have been made by Helmut Finke. That's an instrument maker in Herford in Germany. And he worked together with Otto Steinkopf, that was a bassoon player, and he knew, of course, because of bassoon playing with the holes, he know how to handle with the holes. And so I have one of those Finke trumpets here. That is one of the first Baroque trumpets. And when you see this instrument, you have 3 holes, what the early trumpets had. And the instrument is very, very, it's nothing can swing in here. That's very fixed made. The bell is extremely small. I think they thought that the bell of a trumpet where you play the high register must be the bell of the piccolo trumpet. And so they made this. The mouthpiece it is for a modern mouthpiece, and they played, of course, piccolo mouthpiece on this. And when you play this instrument, it's quite good in tune. The holes work if you want to play with holes, but the sound is more a piccolo than like a really good Baroque or natural trumpet. This was the very beginning. And you also asked about the beginning of the Historic Brass Society. I have been the first time, I think it was in 95, in Amherst at that time. I think, Jean-François, you have also been there. And this was, I don't know when exactly the Historic Brass Society was founded. I think it was about that time or a little earlier. And so the history of Baroque playing, especially Baroque trumpet playing, in Europe is much older. And the first people doing this have been, of course, Ed Tarr and Don Smithers, except Walter Holy, who was their father. And then the third generation of playing is about my generation, and Christian Steele Perkins and Michael Laird, of course. Jean-François also, but he is a little younger than me. But this was mainly playing with holes. Michael Laird made the 4-hole trumpet, he invented the 4-hole trumpet. But we should not forget Don Smithers, who was a really great player. He's still living, I think. He is a strange person, but he was a fantastic player. and I did some recordings with him together, where he played in the early 80s without holes, and it was really fantastic what he did. I don't know if you have heard his recording in the Bach cantata series of the Cantata 77. There's this extremely difficult aria, and he plays it without holes, and it's fantastic. He was a really great, or is a really great player. And I think this was the very beginning. Yeah, okay, now Jean-François, you can tell about the next steps.
Yeah, I'm the younger generation. When I began to interest as a teenager to natural trumpet, the generation of a pioneer were active, like Ettar, Friedemann, these people. It was not something new. We had some model to follow, people who opened the way. And in France, it was time, very optimistic times, where the first Baroque ensemble, Jean-Claude Malgloire and his Grande Écurie, La Chambre du Roi, William Christie and his Art Florissant, there was a lot of projects to discover some French opera which were not played since the 17th or 18th century, opera by Lully, Rameau. There were only a few musicians active in early music field, but only people who did that for passion and not for to do a career, but because they were really passionate of this music and had interest for that. And except the pioneer in France, there was 4 or 5 trumpet players, a little older than me, playing Baroque trumpet. About the question of historical trumpet with holes or without holes, for me, I'm directly interested to the natural trumpet because I discovered the early music from the piccolo first and recordings of on French ensemble who played this music on with Maurice André on the piccolo on modern instruments. So I'm interested in this music on the piccolo first, but I was playing in a band, a special band we have in France, batterie fanfare, which are bands with natural instruments, cavalry trumpet, bugle horn, bass cavalry trumpet, bass bugle horn, natural horn in E flat. The only chromatic instruments are the tuba and sousaphone. And I began to practice Baroque repertoire on a cavalry trumpet. Before I discovered that some people try to do it on historic instruments or copies of historic instruments. It's clear that first time I heard on the radio a Sunday morning a Bach cantata conducted by Arnoncourt, I think, where I could hear a natural trumpet. I think it was certainly Dom Smithers. I was not really impressed, but I impressed because it was very special sound compared what I knew from the modern instrument. But it was a good stimulation for the people of my generation to the it's not bad. Okay, it's very special, but there is some interest in doing that and searching that people what could have been the sound in the 18th and 17th century of this music and specifically of the trumpet. And so it was my way to do that, but just as a hobby, because I was interested about that, and not to choose a career in the early music. So that was the beginning in the 19th and in the same moment I discovered with my first teacher of Baroque trumpet, Jean-Pierre Cagnac, who was active most of the time as a corneto player. He was my teacher and teacher of my colleague Guy Ferber in Lyon. And it was the beginning of the Historic Brass Society. So Historic Brass Society was very important for me since the beginning. I think I joined in the first years because they publish this journal with very interesting articles in English every year. And our teacher said, you are interested in historical informal practice. You are young, you have to be member of the HBS, and because you will read this very interesting article, you will join a sort of community of other people passionate by this music and this way you could practice the music. And I joined the HBS, and we met with Friedemann in one of the first big meetings in Amherst in 1995. In the same time, one of our important things symbolically was when ETA organized in the beginning of the 19th a symposium in Basel at the Schola. And it's the first time I could meet people who made copies of instruments. Bob Barclay was there with his first copy of N9 trumpet. There was a natural trumpet on a table. I could play. Oh, it was interesting. Somebody said, yes, it's a trumpet player, Graham Nicholson. Well, perhaps he's there. You could see him. He made in his garden this trumpet. It was his first trumpet. Don Smithers was there for very polemic discussion, like all the time. But it was very interesting. I discovered there was the world of early music and early brass instrument of talented people passionate by this music, players, instrument maker, musicologists, specialists in iconography, and for me that was the entry in the early music field for people of my generation.
Yeah, I just thought when Jean-François said, the first generation, the second generation, and I would consider myself of third generation, actually, yeah. And the great thing, actually, when I grew into this kind of field. I came from modern trumpet and started with Jean-François and basically changed my whole playing into a different direction. And what actually it feels, or what it felt like for me the last 10 years is like a bit of being Indiana Jones of the early music scene. So trying to read things about early music sources and trying to get them to the instrument, to the practice. And this is just realizing more and more how important the interconnection between us brass players and other instruments are, actually. So I think this is what my generation should actually work on, because like the people of the Baroque era, we should become more aware of other instruments we play with. I mean, we're always talking about trumpets, but without the context of other instruments is basically, there is so many questions unanswered. Yeah. This is actually, or for me, it became more and more one of the central points of my study, because we have this natural instrument and we always want to fit that into musical context. Yeah. And the difficulty is that we're living in a world of equal temperament, no? So where every instrument is actually getting fit into that form. But if we look at the times of Bach and Handel, equal temperament was not predominant at all. It was just in development. And as well, it's just equal temperament is something that is very unique to organs, or better, no, let's say temperaments are very unique to keyboard instruments. If we look at other instruments like violins or oboes or flutes, we see that they work in very different systems. So the thing to understand more about those systems that other instruments work with helps us to formulate how the natural instrument goes into this set. And this is, I think, what is missed so much in today's early music practice, because we want to be fast with rehearsals, the least possible, and then make a concert. And we're all taught from music school actually to play in a equal tempered system. And that, I think, is creating so much difficulties as well for young players to come to the natural trumpet, actually.
Yeah, for me, being in Scandinavia, it's not as big of a field as in other parts of Europe. So if I wanted to, for example, play a gig without holes, there basically would be no opportunity here. There doesn't seem to be as much interest from other players, and I feel that because it's maybe a little bit newer, a little bit less explored than in some other centers in Europe, that there's also more apprehension with conductors and audiences to kind of be exposed to like more authentic holeless playing. So for me, I do almost all of my work with holes. I've started doing classical repertoire without holes, so I've kind of taken a jump there. But for all the Baroque repertoire, I think that it would take quite a bit of education, for us to actually take the chance in doing something more along the lines of the more historically accurate interpretations.
Yeah, well said. And I wonder, I would love to hear. So Kiri Tollaksen, our wonderful representative of the cornetto and sackbut world. But related to the trumpet, I think a lot of trumpet players, and I think I'm not wrong in saying a lot of trumpet players come into playing cornetto, and we all have enjoyed, for instance, playing pieces like in brass quintet, the so-called Bänkesängelieder or Galliard Battaglia, things like that, which we know are kind of from the 16th century or early 17th century, but we play it on trumpet and then we think, well, what was the original instrument? And eventually somebody says, oh, cornetto. Tell us about the cornetto and how it relates to this whole discussion, Kiri.
Yes, well, I definitely can say that there are parallels in the cornetto world to the trumpet world in terms of these issues that we've been talking about so far this morning. Just backing up a little bit, my background is in trumpet. I went the terminal route, went to schools that were very strong in orchestral playing. And that was what I had thought I would be doing as a career as a modern trumpet player. Fortunately, the schools that I went to, I worked with trumpet teachers that did have interest in outside of the typical, equal emphasis of every notes. I grew up in the whole Chicago wind and song era, so there was a knowledge of trying to play what we quote unquote of as musical, and that basically led me. Well, let me back up a little bit more. I had done my work at Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, and studied with Barbara Butler, trumpet. And it was there actually that I was told by Paul Odette, a wonderful lutenist who he and his wife co-direct the early music ensemble there. Paul said, go to the Sibley Music Library, listen to Concerto Castello, which was Bruce Dickey and Francie Fitch and Charles Toote. And that was my first exposure to the cornet. And eventually I was able to borrow an instrument. At that time, I had no idea it was a very poor instrument. It was a Mech Cornetino, but I didn't know anything. with a big trumpet, compromise mouthpiece. But that was my early introduction to this instrument and to this music, and was the start of a very long journey. And HBS, luckily, early on in this period, was a tremendous help to me, because I started reading articles. I started, listening to players. I learned about, of course, Bruce Dickey. I'd heard his recording, his LP. So this opened up a whole new world in terms of interpretation, in terms of phrasing, in terms of eventually understanding that large perspective. This music is all based on vocal forms, and basically launched me out of the typical orchestral world, where everything is equal. Now, one of the, of course, big issues in the cornet world is access to instruments. And luckily, by the time I came into the scene, we had, Christopher Monk had been making resin instruments for several years. Even though my start was not on a great instrument, Mech Cornetino, I eventually was able to get a plastic cornet, and that just, made a big difference in terms of my development. And now, luckily, we have many very fine cornet makers. So the quality of the instrument, plus the matching of hopefully appropriate mouthpiece, and of course that's dependent on the player, makes the ability of creating what we hope to be a more authentic sound on the instrument. One of the issues that we face in cornetto is, yes, we do, a lot of the times we have trumpet players who come to the instrument. Trumpet players already have an embouchure that is developed, and that's half the battle with the cornetto. When I taught at IU, I would say probably 75% of my students were trumpet majors. I had occasional recorder players, and then some players who had zero experience, either brass or woodwind. And as a trumpet player, it has certainly helped having an experience on trumpet. Initially for me, of course, navigating this complete foreign world of fingers, using your fingers as opposed to three, was a handicap for me for many years. And for every trumpet student that I've had, that's been a handicap as well, that eventually, of course, is overcome. But one of the issues that, of course, when concerned with trumpet players coming to the instrument is, the first time you see an acorn mouthpiece, you think, no, that's going to ruin my embouchure, that's not going to work. And so what often happens is trumpet players will use a compromise mouthpiece, which in the short run, of course, allows them to produce a sound, and in some cases maybe produce a reasonable sound. But in the long run, if I can make an analogy, it's like putting a tuba mouthpiece on a trumpet. It's a mouthpiece that is far too big for the instrument. And so you create issues of intonation issues that you end up having to work harder. It's harder to also really try to find the true subtleties of the instrument. But it's, it's certainly, it's a personal choice with every player to decide if they want to kind of jump into that hornet's nest of trying a mouthpiece that is, in most cases, a much smaller mouthpiece that they would ever want to try to deal with. And I know Friedemann and Jean-François had also mentioned this, but one of the events that was really pivotal for me in relation to HBS was the 1995 International early brass festival in Amherst. That was, for me, and I'm sure many of us of that generation, the first opportunity to meet some of these fabulous players throughout the brass field. But for me to, hear Concerto Palatino, La Fenice, and then to meet some of these players that I would eventually study with and then also work with over the years.
I have a, yes, my microphone's on. I have a little question for you, Kiri, just to follow up. So we've heard the famous recordings of the Philadelphia Orchestra Brass Section, Chicago Orchestra Brass Section, and the Cleveland Brass Section, and playing these wonderful Gabrielli things, and it's often told to students nowadays that might be the apex of our brass style. And then, of course, there's a completely different style that we develop as early musicians, playing cornetto and sackbut. What can a trumpet player who may be interested, what are they going to learn? What are they going to bring into their playing that could help them develop as musicians? Of course, they could just become a cornetto player like you and just do that mostly for the rest of their life, or maybe they do some sort of blend. Talk about that. I'm kind of interested in that.
Yeah, thank you for that that question. Like yourself, I mean, that early recording of Philadelphia, Chicago, and Cleveland brass ensembles, the big Gabrielli blowout, at the time, amazing, right? That was the first, really that large scale project had happened, and without having any kind of basis of what now I know, it was stunning. But yeah, when you listen to those recordings now, I mean, it's obviously great brass playing, but it's very angular. It's very, it's not what it can be. Since learning that the majority of our music that we play, that's from the 16th and 17th century, knowing that it's vocally based, of course, to a musician who may not have any background in this, often what vocal means is just sustained and legato and very little nuance. And what, of course, we've learned in all of our research in playing this music is, no, it's not about that. It's about understanding what the text is. If we're actually playing vocal music, we have syllables, we understand what notes are important, what notes are less important. And even in the instrumental models, the Gabriellis, even though we do not have text, we still have those textual models. I'm actually working, for this past year of our pandemic, like many of us, I've been teaching remotely. And I have, very fortunately, some very strong high school trumpet players who want to put together the Canzone Personale to Gabrielli quartet, and they're going to do this remotely. I've been working with them and showing them, look at these rhythmic motives. It's not all bum, 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 beata, tita, 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 but it's bum, 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 bim, ba-di-da, dim, ba-di-da-da-di-da-da-da. And when we start talking about these kind of rhythmical motives, they're like, whoa. So getting back to the famous Philly, Cleveland, Chicago recording, that's a very important historical recording in terms of those ensembles at the time. And how do we provide young players and players who have not had this experience of listening to this music and performing this music in a different light? Well, part of it is showing them, okay, we've got YouTube, here's a very fine ensemble of strong cornet and sackbut players playing the same piece. Listen to it. see how they phrase it. And hopefully over a matter of time, and also in the college experience, and in your case, you're teaching trumpet, and those other professors who are engaging with young professionals, and we are teaching them this way of, it's not just historical playing, it's a way of playing musically.
So it's much easier now for people to access a lot of this information. Also, Juliann Zimmermann is fabulous, and he has made some great videos that I've been seeing on the YouTube, so thank you.
One thing we do kind of at the start of a year is we build hosophones, and this is something that anyone watching this video who's interested in HBS or ITG can do very easily, like going to Home Depot and buy some vinyl tubing and a funnel and stick a mouthpiece in it, and you can start to experience like playing an instrument and start like feeling how that 11th partial feels sharp to us, to our modern ears, and start to experience some of those things to kind of get started. We actually a couple of summers ago at a summer camp with the middle schoolers at the University of Kentucky Summer Trumpet Institute, we had the middle schoolers build hosophones and play Baroque trumpet ensemble music on it. And it actually worked out surprisingly well. As long as we can kind of get the C and the E and G in tune, it sort of worked okay. It's all about cutting the hose at the right length. One of the things that's nearby here, I think that's a good resource to look into, is the Natural Trumpet Making Workshop for people who want to get started. It's just a couple of hours away from us. So over the years at UK, most of my students who get started in natural trumpet start with the horn they've made with Rick Serafinoff in Bloomington. And it's a great opportunity for someone of any age to actually build an instrument with their own hands and get started. Another thing I would recommend that's been helpful to my students, that would be helpful for anyone who wants to learn more about this, is to check out the mini summer programs that are available. Some people have already mentioned, like Elisa mentioned, the Oberlin Baroque Performance Institute. I can't recommend that highly enough. I did that for 3 summers. That's a great thing you can do. Like, you could do it as a high school student. In my case, I was a college professor, and I did it for 3 summers, and I learned a lot, and was able to really dig and like take dance classes and stuff like that. There's a summer academy in Cumberland, Maryland called the Mountainside Baroque Academy, run by Lyle Nordstrom, my former teacher. Barry Boggess used to do the Magnolia Baroque Festival. I'm not sure if that's still happening. There's the Tafelmusic's Baroque Summer Trumpet Institute, the American Bach Soloist Academy. There's lots of summer programs where you can get involved. And of course, there's the HBS, and the HBS programs often have, trumpets. I think people have even mentioned you can pick up an instrument and try it. So yeah, those are some ways I would suggest maybe to get started, and things that have been useful for my students at UK.
I think it depends a bit on which instrument you start on, no? So I think without holes, actually, it's very nice to do English repertoire. So I just did Finger Sonata. I reviewed Finger Sonata, a Finger Sonata that actually Jean-François recorded, or all Purcell, this Purcell book I really like.
Yeah.
Yeah, as well, Handel.
Handel.
Is nice to start. But it's maybe, it depends what your level is, no?
Yes. What about Jason? If I could ask you, I think we talked recently about ensemble music, and maybe that's a good place to start too.
Sure. Well, if anyone wants to do trumpet ensemble stuff, must-have are volumes 2 and 3 of Ed Tarr's Art of Baroque Trumpet Playing. There's a lot of great repertoire there. With my students, I usually start with the early Italian repertoire, like Bandinelli and Monteverdi. What's cool about that music is, like, let's say, for example, this year, I had a couple of freshmen that wanted to get started, yet I also have, like, graduate students who have now been playing Baroque trumpet for, like, 2 or 3 years at a pretty good level. What's cool about that stuff is it's very easy. You can give someone like one note for the whole piece, and they can contribute and participate in a relatively high-level group. So the early Italian stuff. One thing we do at UK almost every concert is we improvise a piece. So maybe I'll introduce, we'll play like the Orfeo Toccata and a Bendinelli sonata, and then we'll talk about the roles of the trumpets in those sonatas and how that's a representation of the improvised tradition. And then we'll just make up a piece. And we do that almost every concert. And that's a great way to start pretty early, because, again, if you have limited skills or limited range, you can still have a specific role within that. So those are some of the pieces that I start with.
Fantastic. Justin, if you're suggesting maybe somebody to start out and doing what you do, is there some repertoire you would suggest for somebody to explore?
I mean, for me, I looked a lot at, some English stuff like Juliann mentioned. So I think the very first thing I actually, because I picked up the Baroque trumpet my undergraduate year, and, I kind of did self-study. The very first thing I actually played on my jury was Let the Bright Seraphim. So some of that repertoire, Purcell sonatas, those things tend to work pretty well. They're not overly technically difficult, and they're tuneful and musical. So I think it's something that makes it it's something that's doable. So you can set a goal and it's achievable, I think. So I think that recommendation was actually a very good one.
Since the sound of the cornetto is so similar to the human voice, I always recommend my students start off with vocal music, and it can be as simple as hymns, anything that does not have a wide range. I also particularly like the vocal music of Cima, C-I-M-A, all very accessible pieces and very musical. There was a tradition during the 16th and 17th century to ornament a single line from a vocal madrigal or chanson. And we have a wonderful resource, compilation written by Richard Ehrig, in which he includes the original vocal piece, as you can see, and then underlays that with the written out improvisation. You can see there's 12 different improvisations here. Some are simple and some are very, very difficult. So this is a great resource of learning repertoire, but also selecting something that's maybe not as difficult. In terms of instrumental music, we can adapt pieces of our trumpet repertoire. The Practical Studies by Robert Getchell, I think, is very accessible to cornet playing. Frescobaldi is a great resource. There's some difficult pieces, but many of his canzoni are very accessible for more advanced beginners. I especially like when my students are ready to start reading facsimile. I often will have them try out Ricciot's canzone. As you can see, this is in soprano clef, so get a chance to read different clefs. And then when the student is ready for meatier repertoire, Castello and Fontana, these are the Tomasis of the cornet world. Finally, I think one of the better resources that we have is an article that our panelist Elisa Koehler wrote called A Trumpeter's Guide to the Cornet. It's a fabulous resource, and I recommend everybody seek that out. ITG published this in their journal January of 2006. And for those of you who are interested specifically in Baroque trumpet, Elisa also wrote an article called A Beginner's Guide to the Baroque Natural Trumpet from March 2002, also in the ITG journal. And I believe you can find both of these articles in the archive of the ITG journals.
So I have Juliann and then Friedemann. Let's go to Juliann first.
Yeah, I think what I really wanted to mention, actually, something that is missing at the moment, which actually hinders the advancement of the field, and what I think is important to say one time, is that what we're really missing for teaching is good translations of sources, because a lot of material is already available, actually. I mean, I can find most of the historical German sources, for example, online, but they are open to me, which is nice, yeah, but they are not open to people that don't speak German. And this is something that is really, it's just something that is missed. And I think it would be great to do more, or to get more support for translations. Like, for example, I mean, what I think would really help is, for example, to have a translation of Mietzler, because it's the Bibliothek, which is I think it's 4 Bände, and it's such great works to look through and to understand better how music at that time worked, for example. And this is just something that I really wanted to mention that needs to be done.
That's a fantastic project to do. Good incentive. Fantastic. Friedemann, what would you like to say?
I want to say some final words because I think I have to leave. Just in addition to a little thing what Kiri said. Kiri, a nice. When I was younger, I also played a little cornetto, but not with a small mouthpiece because it didn't work with me. And I had a few students, they are very good cornetto players, and we played, I think it is De Fleut and Lusthof for recorder. That's a beautiful piece for also with articulation for young cornetto beginners. And then one thing to Juliann. Juliann, that was fantastic said what you said about the music making today. I had the feeling, or I remember when I worked with different groups 30 years ago, we discussed about a piece. I remember one period we had a concert with Tamaris Kamaulis Bieber sonatas with all 12, and we had a week time for this. So we tried to develop the piece. We really started with nothing. We started with nothing. We had no idea about the pieces, and then the pieces grew more and more and more and more, and finally we did a fantastic series of concerts with this, and a fantastic CD with this sonatas. And later with this orchestras, I had the feeling that I am a human organ pipe. So I just have to play right notes. That's everything. When I wanted to discuss, we did the same project with the same orchestra 20, 30 years later. We had half a day of rehearsal with the trumpets because there are only a few pieces, and then a concert. So it was really, you have the feeling you are not a musician, you are just a machine who has to produce right notes. There is no discussion about intonation, no discussion about interpretation. You just have to work right. And that was, for me, one of the reasons why I decided I don't want to play with several groups. So I just nowadays play with groups. I like to work with them, and we can not discuss about everything, because of a lot of musicians discuss because of they want to discuss, and not because of they want to find a good way to make music. But it's quite often that you just have to go to a gig, play the right notes, and that's it. And there is no question about what you said, Juliann, about well-tempered tuning, mean tone tuning, and so a lot of orchestras are not interested in this, and that's very important. One last thing, what I am working on now is a very interesting topic. I did about 30 years ago, maybe a little longer. I did a recording of the Haydn Concerto on key trumpet. And I think it was the very first recording. It was, of course, not the best, but it was, for that time, it was okay. And since a few years, I'm working more on this instrument. I have a good friend who makes instruments, and we developed some instruments, how they should be, how the keys should be, how many keys you need for the music. And then we come to one point you have in your schedule for today about research. There is so much music from the beginning of the 19th century, of the first half, what is written just for trumpet, and on the part it's written Klappentrompete, so it's key trumpet, or machine trumpet, or the same part for flugelhorn. So I think at that time the player decided what instrument he wanted to play. And that's a huge field of music, not published, we don't know the pieces. And that's a very interesting field where we can have enough work and have great work to do. There are great pieces. And yeah, that's something I'm doing at the moment. And that's besides playing and besides daily playing on a natural trumpet. Just one little joke. We made a little video for a group I'm playing with, and I play there some pieces. I sent it to Jason. I played the Reiche Fanfare and beginning of the Michael Haydn Concerto. But at the end, I play a scene of Bandinelli where I play with a natural trumpet, a short piece by Fantini, and in the other hand, I have a glass of red wine. What is said in the Bandinelli method, that the clarino player has to play, to hold in one hand a glass of red wine, and when he stops playing, he has to drink. And I made a short video of this, and I hope you all can see it. And that's a funny thing at the end. Okay, thanks very much for this conversation. It was great to see you all, and the most important, stay healthy.
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Joanna Ross-Hersey, and I am Secretary of the Historic Brass Society. I am a former member of the United States Coast Guard Band, and I am now Professor of Tuba and Euphonium at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. We would love to have you join as a member of the Historic Brass Society. Our membership runs from January through December, and our journal is published in early spring each year. And it is very easy to join us. You can find our website, historicbrass.org, and we have a Join Renew option along the top banner. From there pops up the new window with our options, which include an individual yearly membership, which is $42. We also have a student and senior membership, which is $35. And we have a 3-year deal. For 3 years of membership, it is $110. You can pay online right there at the website through PayPal. You don't need to be a member of PayPal to pay that way. We also will take payment through Stripe or mailing a check to the address that you will find there. There is an About Us drop-down menu with all of that information under the Join Us tab. You could also donate to the Historic Brass Society through the online donation portal that you will find there. Please join us on social media. You'll find us on Facebook and on Instagram at Historic Brass. For anything related to membership, I am happy to receive your comments and questions. My email is membership@historicbrass.org. Anything you email will come to me. I am honored to serve the Historic Brass Society as secretary, and I am here if you need any help. Thank you so much, and stay well. I look forward to meeting you soon.